Welcome, everyone, to the June Wireside Chat. I'm Paul Whitcover, the Associate Dean of the Online MFA, and I'm joined by Nathanael Green, who's an instructor in the Online MFA. Let me give you his bio. Nathanael, or Nate, writes and teaches in upstate New York. After a decade slinging words as an advertising copywriter for clients like Mars Incorporated and Fruit of the Loom, and with an MFA in creative writing, he recovered from corporate communications and entered writing and teaching full-time. He's been twice named the Betty Harder McClellan Distinguished Professor of Humanities. That's a harder act to follow, I suppose you might say. And his short stories, essays, and articles have appeared in dozens of publications, including most recently Broad River Review and McSweeney's Internet Tendency. He's the co-author of 3 novels, Language of the Bear, Through the Narrows, and Out of the Fire, and is currently writing a historical novel inspired by ventriloquism and the 17th century German witch trials, where he's had the good fortune to live in return for historical research. And a parenthetical there informs us that he lived in Germany, not the 17th century. That's important to note. So welcome, Nate.
Thanks, Paul.
Usually I try to get the ball rolling in these interviews by just asking a little bit about, what's your path that led you to where you are today as a writer?
Oh, how long is our meeting here? I'll try to condense it down. It started as a kid, like I think like many of the people here probably. I loved stories. I read a lot as a kid. I loved seeing movies. I was just commenting on one of the students' papers who mentioned Star Wars, and Star Wars was an inspiration for them. And the first stories that I wrote were, Nathan and Luke go and save the world. So it was very much like those sorts of things from like grade school. But I just always loved writing. I loved languages, and for a long time I got into languages. My undergraduate degree is in international area studies, so I studied multiple languages there, and I think through just the love of language and how grammar works, and all of just curiosity about syntax and storytelling and how we communicate, I just kept coming back to writing. So like in my bio, I graduated from my undergraduate and started working in corporate America, found that my writing skills were really valuable, worked really nicely in corporate communications, but it wasn't as exciting or fulfilling or as challenging as writing fiction. So after a number of years writing for corporations and businesses, I decided to start writing a little bit, and then I decided I'd audit a course in creative writing at a college where I was nearby. I said, well, I really like this a lot more even now. So I went on and got my MFA, and eventually sort of stepped away from writing for organizations and business, and started writing a lot more for articles and short fiction and novels.
Excuse me. Do you think that you gained anything that benefited you as a creative writer from the writing that you did, like in a corporate environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes. A couple of the things that I can think of off the top of my head. One is the understanding that creativity comes when you hit it with a crowbar. Writing for businesses, frequently it's, we need something creative, and we need something well written and thoughtful, and we need it in an hour.
Yeah.
So a lot of what I did was on deadline, right? And it was one of those moments where as much as I'd like to think I could just sit in my hammock in the woods and wait for the muse to come tap me on the head, it was pretty clear that if I wanted to get good words, I just had to sit down and get those good words. And like maybe that's the biggest thing from working corporate communications. Or maybe the other thing, which tends to be kind of handy, what I did in my previous life was largely advertising and marketing, which a lot of people like. I mean, like in the industry, they call them the creatives work in advertising. Um, but that experience with marketing and understanding like how to present myself and how to polish for professional presentation. A lot of times when I talk with other writers and things like, well, how do I put together a website? How do I do this? Those are things that I just have experience with. And it wasn't even a purposeful thing that I chased down, but it is pretty handy to say, oh, if there's an event or something that I need to promote, I've gotten the experience to understand how to frame that.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because that gives me the excuse or opportunity to drop your website into the chat. There we go. But the reason I asked that question in the first place and kind of took that tangent was because I think it's important for our students to know that there is room for creativity in many places that you might not expect it, and that if you're a good writer, you can kind of make a place for yourself in a lot of different fields. You don't, as we all know, unfortunately, you can't always support yourself from your writing, your creative writing, your fiction. So it's good to have, a backup in place. And I feel like anybody that comes out of an MFA program really probably has the skills to succeed in the way that you were talking about in that sort of environment.
Yeah, I think so. I mean that's I think one of the wonderful things that an MFA does, I think, and did for me was gave me sort of a space to write. And for me that was a lot of it's just practice for me of like, okay, I have to write this and I'm going to write this and I need to submit because we're workshopping soon enough. And it boils down to sort of that daily productivity that I often mentioned, like any of my students who've been reading my announcements, I often liken it to music, right? In that, if you're a musician, you practice your scales. And if you're practicing them, then some opportunity comes up, you have the skills to sort of apply them in different ways, right? Somebody who's good at the trumpet can jump from jazz to rock to all sorts of genres because of like sort of those foundational like the craft elements that we talk about. And absolutely, I think you're right. You come out of an MFA with those kinds of skills and that kind of craft. It ideally should open lots of doors for all sorts of writing and communication.
Yeah. I want to remind everyone that if you have questions for Nate, just throw them into the chat. I'll make sure to surface them for him. So it's interesting, like if you're a musician, like I know some musicians and they do practice all the time, every day. They practice their scales, they practice like a lot of rudimentary sort of things, like a guitar player is going to practice fingerings all the time because they have to keep their fingers super supple. What is there an equivalent practice for writers? I mean, like when you're let's say your typical writing day, do you start off by doing some kind of exercise to limber yourself up, so to speak, or do you just jump into whatever it is that you're working on at that point?
Um, no, so I'm a big fan of the work from a psychologist named Anders Ericsson, who talks about deliberate practice. It's a long story, but like maybe we've heard of the 10,000 hour rule. Like sort of
Yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell took this idea and sort of morphed it a little bit, but the basic idea stands that like through all this research, between 5 and 10,000 hours of deliberate practice is what it takes to become like a grandmaster in just about any domain that requires the kind of skill and craft that we're talking about. But one of the things that Erickson talks about is what he calls deliberate practice, right? And I sort of think about that again, like in music, I have a lot of friends who play the guitar, and like you can just sit there and kind of like strum and sing along and play some chords, or you can practice your scales, right? And that deliberate practice is the practicing your scales where it's a little bit challenging, like it's a little bit difficult. You're not just like kind of hanging out. And I think it's the same with athletics and writing, where like that deliberate practice is the moment where it's like, oh, I'm doing something challenging. So for me, what I try to do I find time and work it into my writing schedule in addition to the other things, is I do try for some of that deliberate practice where I'll be reading something and like, oh wow, so I just read one of Lauren Groff's novels, and she did some wonderful things in there with foreshadowing, and her dialogue was really interesting. So for me, it's taking 15 or 20 minutes and saying, here's this particular skill that I'm really interested in. So I'm really going to try to do it and see what works and what doesn't. And like it's 15 minutes of kind of stressful writing, but I mean like stressful in the same way that like, if you're a musician, you like music, it's stressful because it's a little bit of a challenge. Um, so I do try to apply deliberate practice to my writing as much as I can. But also I think there are a lot of logistical aspects to it also that say, how much time do I have to practice my craft? How much time do I have to make the production? How much time do I have to, there are all these different moving parts. Not sure whether that answers your question.
Yeah,
but.
no, definitely. I'm going to pull a question out of the chat, and for the rest of the hour, I'll probably just be going back and forth, pulling stuff out, and then following up your answers, and maybe asking a few questions of my own as well.
Sure.
So here's a great question. Actually, this is not a question I was going to start with, but I like it so much I am going to start with it. Do you keep a dream diary? And the writer says, I've been using one as I guess, a prompt for a daily writing practice.
Interesting. I do not keep a dream diary. I know some people who do, and they seem to enjoy it and get a lot out of it. I don't. I do keep. I keep many journals. I have probably 7 or 8 notebooks that I have all over the place for different projects and reasons. So I do write daily, but not specifically about my dreams.
So that's like the next comment in the chat is, do you keep a journal of writing ideas to look back on? And I assume that that's the sort of thing that you're talking about.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I absolutely do. Like as the chat pops up a little bit, I can catch a little bit, and I think someone mentioned they live or die by their journal. Maybe it was a dream journal, but I live or die by my journals also. I have a daily one that I just scribble in when I'm making my schedule or things like that, or I take with me when I'm out and an idea comes to me. I have a little one that's right here, a little one that fits in my pocket, and I carry that around. And then I have another one that I use for like more journaling type things where memories that come up and whatnot. I won't show you all the rest. I have dedicated.
Are they color coded?
Yes. Yeah, they are. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Love it.
And so I have a big one for when so the first draft of the novel that I'm working on, I wrote by hand. So I had like a big one that I had room to do it in. One of the things, like just as a quick note, I do try to keep track of my ideas and whatnot. And one of the ways that I do that I found really, really helpful, let me just flip through this, is I started using little icons. Like I draw a little icon in the top corner. Like, so this one, I don't know if we can see, there's like this little book that I drew here is just my notes on a book that I was reading. So actually that's about Matrix by Lauren Groff that I was just talking about.
Okay.
So I as I go through, so I to try to keep some sort of organization with my ideas, right? I have a particular icon of like, oh, here's a story idea. Oh, here's some interesting note that I thought about a book that I read, or a quote that I found, right? If I really love something that someone else wrote, I'll draw huge quotation marks at the top of the page and put it in there. So as I flip through, I'm like, oh, here's an idea, here's this thing. I found it helpful.
That's very cool. So so does that mean that you also have a notebook for the project that you're working on right now? I mean, do you like write character sketches or do your plot outline within that notebook? I'm just wondering how organized you are about pre-planning on all that kind of stuff.
So pantsers and plotters and who like plots out ahead of time. And I had been a pantser for a very long time. I'm like, I want to be surprised by it. I don't know what. Then I found after I would write the first draft, I ended up outlining it anyway because I would go back and like, it doesn't work quite right, and I would have to re-outline after the fact. So for the notebook that I'm using now for the project that I'm on, I did quite a bit of outlining and character sketches, and even just there are passages in that where I will go through a craft book. I still, I'll go back to Save the Cat or Zinser's book to say, what are they saying about how to write a novel? Because I feel like I don't know about you, Paul, but I feel like every novel I write, I'm learning how to write that novel and not any of
100%.
the other ones.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's lots of uh, organization and character sketches and historical things. So it's a historical novel. So I'm taking notes about what was going on in history at the time, but it's also interspersed with scenes. So I have, I don't know, maybe the first third of the first notebook is outlining and ideas and character sketches, and then I started writing scenes not in the order that they would necessarily show up in the book, but I just sort of that creative got a little pent up, and it's like, okay, now I want to start telling the story now. Like the character sketches are fun, but I want to get to the writing. So I would write a couple scenes, and then if I hit a wall, it's like, well, I'm not sure what happens next or what's going on over here. So then there's more outlining. So there's a lot of planning in it. I don't know how organized it really is, but my little icons do help.
I'm sure. I mean, it's all landing on a subconscious level, right?
Right.
It's somewhere deep down there, it's all being organized and sorted and filed, and when you need it, it's there.
That's right. Yeah.
How do you come how do you come to trust that process? I found like just for myself, um, learning to have faith in my own sort of innate ability to tell a story and how I tell it, learning like that's the way I do it. And that's what I'm stuck with, like it or not. So I have to lean into it and I believe in it and in myself. How do you come to that? How did you come to that realization about yourself as a writer?
I, I'm not sure that I have, Paul. Right? I don't know. It's uh I I think what is making a difference, or like has started to make a difference over the previous couple of years, which took me a little while to get to, was the realization that this is supposed to be fun.
Mm,
So when I got to that point of moving beyond like, oh, I need to publish this and it has to be really good, and I don't know that there was a particular moment, but there was some accumulation of ideas that kind of say, well, like, listen, my writing isn't going to save the village from famine. Like, this isn't a thing that I have to do. And if I'm worried about it and stressed out about it and not enjoying it, why would I do it? So that idea to sort of trust the process, I sort of twisted that and said like, well, I'm gonna have fun with the process, right? And like, so my friends in the writing group all know I'm like, I'm hanging out with my imaginary friends today, and I'm looking forward to it, right? And like whatever comes out on the page, then it's a matter of I try to put on a separate hat later, right? So it's like I'm hanging out with my imaginary friends. Horrible thing. I do horrible things to my imaginary friends, right?
mm.
But that's what we all do. And then once I have a draft and once I have all of that fun stuff put together, then I sort of look at it like a puzzle. Like now I put on the editor hat and say, okay, I've read enough books. I've studied for a long time. What's going on with this? Where do pieces fit? What doesn't quite fit? And how do I fit? And I think it helps me at least to sort of switch between these two roles of the creative who has lots of fun and tells this crazy story and do whatever I want with that, and it can be as messy as possible. And then switching into sort of problem solving engineer mode of like,
Yep.
okay, well, here's what I have. I want it to be good, right? I want to make sure the story functions and all the subplots are great and it's, does all these things that I have the goals for. And then it's a matter of not feeling precious about it, but just like coming at it with a wrench like a mechanic, like, how do we make this thing work?
Yeah. So when you do that, are you relying on your, the editor whose hat you've put on, or do you also use like do you have beta readers? Do you have a group of fellow writers that you show stuff to as you are, moving through the manuscript?
Yeah, yeah, I do. So these are our friends I've accumulated over the years, partly through my MFA program. This is one of the things that I mentioned to my students at SNU too, of the people that you're writing with in your MFA program are probably going to be writing for a long time afterwards too. And like there's sort of this built-in community. But then also friends that I've met at conferences and conventions and but yeah, so usually what I do is, I'll write my first draft and then I'll make a second draft and try to tinker at that with my editor hat and make it as good as I can make it. And then I share it with my writing group, and they'll come back with all sorts of wonderful, thoughtful feedback that helps immensely. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, I'm teaching MFA 505 right now, which is the introductory course to the program. And one of the things that we talk about in that course is literary citizenship, the writers community, and the importance of workshopping. And I think you've like answered all of those questions right there. That's something that you can get out of an MFA. And I encourage everybody here to like make those connections as you go through this program, because they will last beyond it, and you'll be really glad that you have those connections, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, Paul, do you have students who come back to you after they've graduated for years and might stay in touch or share work
Oh
with you?
yeah.
Or
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, up until this year, this particular event, which takes place every month, the Wireside Chat, was, you know, my guess would be instructors in the program. And our program is fairly new. It's only been around for like 6 years, I think, or maybe 7. Um, so it's only really been this year that I started to have like a critical mass of graduates from the program who have gone on to publish their work and everything. So now I also have those alums come in and read from their work and talk about their journey and their careers and what they've learned, how they applied what they learned in the program and what they've learned since graduating from the program about the life of a professional writer. So yeah, definitely.
oh, that's great. That's
Yeah.
great. That's one of the things that stuck with me too was especially in my MFA program, right? It's exactly that thing where the instructors in the MFA program are all also writing writers, right? Like at some
Yep.
point, like we're kind of peers, right? And
Yep.
and I feel like there's this holdover from like maybe high school where like, oh, you've got students and then you've got teachers.
Yeah.
But one of the lovely things about I think maybe graduate programs in general, I don't know. But MFAs certainly is like I feel like all of the instructors are also writers and like to talk to other writers, whether they're students or
Yeah.
not.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself. I mean, I've learned so much from teaching, and not just at the graduate level, because although I've never taught undergrad writing, but I've taught like, you know, adult education writing, like at Gotham Writers Workshop or the
Okay.
UCLA Extension.
Yeah.
Um, and you're 100% correct. I mean, in that kind of situation, at that level, yes, you might have some tips and tricks up your sleeves that your students don't know about, but essentially, you're really learning as much from them as they are from you, and
Yeah.
so it is kind of a peer-to-peer relationship, I think.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you don't have to get your discussion board posts in on time, everyone. Um, all right, let me pull another question out of the chat. When creating a new story, do you tend to start with an emotion, idea, or a character in mind? Tell us about like the novel you're working on now. How did that begin?
Um, so that began a long time ago. I want to say it began maybe 15 years ago or so. Um, and in the weirdest way, and it's sort of, I don't know, just things have glommed onto this idea since then. My wife and I went to a ventriloquist show. There was like a comedian ventriloquist thing that we went to, and the performer mentioned something about, for the longest time, for the vast majority of human history, a human voice was proof of life. And that just sort of stuck with me as just this like interesting idea, and probably only interesting to me, of like, for how long humans have been around, if you heard words, it meant that there was some sort of being delivering it. And from that, I had mentioned my undergrad was in international area studies. I studied and lived in Germany for a little while. Uh, Started to learn about the German witch trials, which were similar to, but still significantly different from the things that we might be kind of familiar with. And then sort of these two ideas started knocking about of if voice is proof of a spirit or some sort of being, and we have a belief in witches and devilry and sorcery. How does this work historically? Were there ventriloquists, like not necessarily with the dummy, but people who could do the distant voice or things like that? And how would that work with, fears of sorcery and witch crazes? And so, and just like I said, over years, as I was writing other things, that's an idea that was in a notebook for a long time,
Yeah.
and just sort of like, oh, I'd come back to it and add a little bit, and then play with it a little bit, and then add a little bit and play with it a little bit. So it sort of grew very strangely, and then eventually I got to the point where, well, I need a character and I need a story, and then it
Yeah.
was sitting down and brainstorming. But for other stories, it varies, right? Sometimes it's I think the person who asked the question mentioned, like, is it an emotion? And sometimes it is, right? Like I'll hear a song and I'll have a feeling like I don't know what that is, but I want to play with it and I want to build on it. And other times there's a character who comes fully formed, and I just want to see what happens when I put them in terrible situations.
Yeah. I know for me, there's definitely there's a for whatever reason, the emotional content of the endings of stories and novels are really important to me. And a lot of times when I put a book down, I'll have a certain feeling, and I'll think, I want to be able to evoke that feeling in somebody
Yeah,
else. And
yeah,
and
yeah.
that's the germ maybe of an idea.
Yeah. So I had seen there was a presentation I had seen by an illustrator, but a lot of what he talks about applies to, like, I think, creativity in general. But but he made this mention of, like, this is how they lure you into art school, is if looking at art is this much fun, how much fun must it be to make it? Right. So I know what you're saying. Like, you finish the book and you're like, oh, there's this ineffable, intangible thing that I want to be able to make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let me grab another question here. Actually, there's one I'm going to kind of paraphrase a little bit, which is how much uh, how much grammar does a professional writer need to know? Like, how, if you've got a copy editor on one end of the spectrum, and then you've got like a third grader on the other end of the spectrum, where does a professional writer need to fall in terms of like just being a master of English grammar?
Yeah. Um, I probably fall on the more curmudgeonly side of the answer to this. And I think, like, full disclosure, I think it's because I just enjoy grammar, right? Like I said, like, I like languages, I like how they work, like I'm
Yeah.
just curious about that. Um, I don't think every writer needs to be a grammarian and be able to define, all the things. Because there are other people who help and whatnot, but I do think having a fairly firm grasp on grammar can be really, really helpful. Right? I think about grammar and vocabulary are the materials that we use to make our art. So understanding what they are and how they work, I think allows us greater creativity. I was talking with somebody the other day, and they're saying, well, what do you think about Grammarly? And I said, well, it's really helpful, right? I know a lot of people use Grammarly, and it can be really helpful. But if you want to be a professional writer, when Grammarly puts a comma in your sentence, that changes the meaning of the sentence, right? The way we punctuate and the way we use grammar. So if we rely on somebody else to understand how to do it or to do it for us, I feel like that kind of diminishes how much control you have over what you're making. I mean, maybe the whole answer to that is I'm just a bit of a control freak or something, but
Yeah.
I feel like having a firm grasp of grammar aids your creativity and the adeptness with which you can write.
Yeah. I think it's unfortunate, like I wanted to be a writer, really for as long as I can remember, but I never liked grammar in school. It was like it was a subject that felt almost punitive to me, and I
Hmm.
associated it with grades, and I associated it with bad
Yeah,
grades. And I feel like so many writers come into the program with that sort of experience, whereas just as you just said, really grammar is what we work with. It's like, paints that a painter uses or the notes
yeah,
that a musician uses. And I mean,
yeah,
some sort of familiarity is important. So how? Where do you go to get that knowledge?
yeah. So I don't really fortunate, I guess. When I was a kid, I was maybe like 10 years old, maybe at 11. Um, my I already liked books, and we were visiting my uncle, and we went out to a bookstore, um, and he'd pick out a book, whatever you want. So I picked out a book, and he bought that, and he's like, "Well, I'm also going to get you this book." And what he bought me was Strunk and White's Elements of
Yeah,
Style,
classic.
and he said, if you know everything in this book, you will write better than your teachers. Right. And like, again, like maybe just as a spiteful 11-year-old,
Yeah.
it's like, I want to
Hey,
write better than my teachers.
right. Yeah, don't discount the power of spite.
Right. Right. Like it's a pretty good motivator sometimes.
Absolutely.
So I went home that night and I read it cover to cover, and I would refer to this, and that's sort of, I think, where it started. It's a style guide, like it's not super great for grammar. Now that I am an adult, I have some issues with their style recommendations. Like I would argue with Drunken White on a couple of their points.
Yeah.
But I mean, how do we get grammar? For me, the majority of how I learned grammar was studying foreign languages. Um, right. As I studied German, I was like, well, that's weird. How do they make their sentence that way? And just I think by trying to understand a different language, it sort of puts English into juxtaposition of like, oh, well, we do it this way, or we do it similarly, or it's different. So a lot of what I did was through foreign languages. Um, I don't know. I did a little bit of diagramming. I don't know, Paul, did you do diagramming? Did you do sentence grid diagramming?
Very. I had a fifth grade English teacher that dabbled in it. Let's put it that way,
Okay,
but not really.
sure.
But my mom was an English teacher, and she that was a big part of what she did with her students. Thank God,
Okay.
or maybe not, but she never taught us that at home. But yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I guess I'll just throw it out there. A book I recommend to all my students for grammar is Dryer's English. Came out a couple of years ago, and it's a good guide, and it's pretty amusing and very snarky attitude.
Okay.
Um,
So I haven't read that, and this is, I think, one of my hesitations, because I feel like a lot of people feel the way that you were talking about earlier, Paul, of
yeah,
like it feels punitive, of just like, oh, there are all these rules and I have to memorize this rule, and what is a gerund? Like, why do I?
right,
It just feels so abstract, right? I think about it, it's sort of like taking a bunch of 8-year-olds and like giving them a soccer ball, but saying like, oh, here's what offsides means, and here's how you have to do this, right? As opposed to, they're going to learn soccer so much better if you give them a ball and say like, have fun, and
right.
oh, also pay attention to this. So trying to find, I'll have to look at Dryers, because I haven't read that, and I'd be interested to see something that's not just dried and musty, like a list of rules for grammar.
Yeah, you might enjoy it. I mean, he's coming at it from a copy editor perspective, which is a little bit different than a grammarian,
Yeah,
because it's more practical, I suppose you would say.
yeah.
Um, here's a question. What roles did you look for work when you, I mean, this kind of gets to what we were saying before. Here's somebody who's graduating with her MA or, yeah, their MA in English creative writing this month they have no professional experience. What, what, what's their next step? I mean, and I don't even know what this person is interested in. And I assume they're interested in creative writing. I guess their
Yeah.
next step could be to apply to the MFA program. But
Right, right. Um, oh, so for my experience, um, I was lucky. So for how it worked for me, I was working in advertising and marketing. And eventually the people I worked with discovered that I was a pretty good writer. So they like gave me more and more writing tasks. And then I moved into other roles that were exclusively writing. And then after I got my MFA, I was already pretty well involved in the industry. Um, so I continued with that for a little while, and then I started to teach just one course. There was a local college that was looking for an adjunct, and I taught one course, and that was pretty fun. And they said, "Well, would you like to teach two next semester?" I said, "Well, yeah, this is pretty good. I like this." And then they said, "Well, would you teach three or four next semester?" I said, "Well." I do have another job, so we need to like sort of figure something out here. But I just slowly transitioned from one into the next. And like to be perfectly frank, I feel like it was just luck. Like I just happened to, right? I got out of college, I got the type of job that allowed me to grow into things that I was good at. Um, One of the things that I do tell students and other people that I work with now, if you're graduating with masters and you're interested in writing in general, what can be really, really helpful is looking at organizations that you respect or like, because I think it's far easier to approach, say there's a nonprofit you're that is close to your heart, to call them up and say, hey, I like this nonprofit. I'm really interested in your mission. I'd like to help out in some way. And my skills are, I'm an excellent writer. So if you need help with crafting web copy or things like that, that might be a viable way to approach it. But without knowing more details about the person's background and et cetera, I
yeah,
don't know how much advice I can give.
yeah. All right, let me pull another question out of here. How detailed do you go into world building, or do you focus more on the writing and let the character and plot let you build the world for you? Or since you focus more on historical fiction, do you not have to worry so much about that since it's already there for you?
Oh, so that's a good question. I do also write speculative fiction. So I largely write in the speculative area. I largely write fantasy. So there's a lot of world building there. Um, there, I would say, no, I'm thinking about. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this as I'm thinking about it. For the historical fiction, it's a lot of world finding. I think that's so. There's a lot of time of thinking about the types of things that we think about in world building, right? What is the economy like? Like what type of currency did these people actually use, right? So and then it's me researching that
Right,
instead of making it up.
right.
Um, so I think, but I even with contemporary stories that I write, like there's still a little bit of world building of trying to still
Absolutely.
make a full like sort of the sense of verisimilitude that there
Yeah.
is life here. Um, for the fantasy that write the speculative things, it's entirely dependent on the story, I think. So, like I said, if there's a character that I'm like, oh, I don't know where this character came from, they're amazing. I want to see what happens to them, and then it's sort of I dive in with the character and see what's going on with that, and sort of world build as I go along. And other ideas are much more about the world, right? Like, oh, what if this thing exists in this area, and how does that look in the world? And then I drill in and say, oh, how do the people function within this world?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm somebody that I'm also a speculative fiction writer, and some of my speculative fiction has had a historical, framework to it. Like, for example, I wrote a World War One vampire novel, so I had to do a lot of primary research into
Yeah.
World War One and reading first person accounts of life in the trenches and all that sort of stuff. While at the same time, within those parameters, like exercising my imagination. And I found that incredibly fulfilling,
Yeah.
to like be bumping up against those historical boundaries, I guess,
Yeah.
and still being able to exercise an incredible more imagination than I would have imagined possible within those
Yeah.
restraints. That was kind of a turning point for me, actually, in my own writing, because ever since then, I have more or less focused on setting my stuff within a particular historical period.
Hmm. So
Do
you
you
so you're
find
doing
like,
you're
I'm sorry,
doing
go
double
ahead.
duty there, Paul. You're doing double
Well,
duty of like I'm world
yeah.
building and world finding, and
Well,
then but
I think they're the same thing, or they're two sides of the same coin or something. I love that expression, world finding. I hadn't thought of that before, but that's it exactly. And I mean, whether it's speculative fiction or historical fiction, you are finding that world, right? You're like discovering what the limits of it are, how to evoke it in a way that readers will believe. Um, yeah, I find it super fascinating, and I really do believe like world building is an important component even of contemporary fiction. It's just a lot less. It's I don't want to say it's more subtle. It's more taken for granted by the writer and the reader than it is
yeah.
perhaps in other genres.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, like you said, like it's interesting how through the research I'll bump into something that throws my plan off. Right. So like just uh so my protagonist in the story that I'm working on now goes away to university and does all sorts of things. And he goes to this university because it's all these particular reasons. And then through my research, I come to find out, well, wait a second, the town that he's from would have been Catholic, and this was entirely a Calvinist university, so they would not admit any Catholics at all to this university in this year. And there's just this moment of like, oh my God, like the
Yeah,
whole turn of the plot like just got ruined by this
right.
one little fact.
Damn you, history.
Right, right. And I feel like fantasy, I'm like, I could wiggle it
Yeah,
around, but I actually think like it turns out nicely because it's this new challenge of like, okay, well now I have to figure this out, right? Like like you said, there's more imagination involved then because well, it's not easy. So now I have to like wrangle something different and figure out like what else is going on.
yeah. And I guess, there comes a time at which, you're writing a novel, right? So history is not in charge. Even if you're doing your best to adhere to the historical record, there may come a time in your plot where you're just like, screw it. I'm just going to go because this is like too cool of an idea, or everything up to this
Yes.
point is impelling me in this direction. I gotta make this choice.
Yeah, yeah, and especially with the historic fiction, I already sort of have the author's note in my head
Yeah.
of like there are some events that I needed to happen in
Right.
1626, so it's a little bit fudged, but it's for the story.
Right.
Bear with me.
We had on Word for Word, which is another literary event that we do here at SNHU. We had Courtney Milan as our guest a couple months ago, and she writes, historical romances,
Mhm.
and this question came up with because she writes historical romances like Regency romances set in England that have like Asian characters who
Yeah,
are who are like members of the nobility. And so this question came up, and her answer was basically like, it's all made up. It's all, none of it is
right.
real. None of it's like what you get
Yep.
in a history book, regardless of what the historical trappings may be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I remember too. I forget who it was. This will bother me, but I was at a conference one time, and there was a panelist who was talking about historical fiction and research that he did. And he was saying he wrote a historical fiction set in uh, what is now England, but during the Roman occupation of
Mhm.
right, like around the first century. Um, and he was doing all this historical research. If I remember correctly, I think he, like by trade, was a historian, and he was talking about how the Roman legions found that it was really, really helpful to have really coarse cotton trousers that the legions would wear, and they found that they would often dye them blue. So in his story, he has these cotton trousers, and he said when this book came out, he was excoriated by people who didn't believe that Romans had blue jeans. Right? So like even if it is real, it
Yeah,
feels made up sometimes, and we
right,
won't believe it. So
right. That's true. Can't win for losing.
that's right.
Here's a great question that I want to bring up. I see that your books are co-written. How do you break out duties when co-writing, and what is the process when working with someone else to write a novel? Can
I
these
know a
two
lot of
men, I can't help but think of the Odd Couple, right? Can these two men share an apartment without driving each other crazy?
right. Um, uh, I was again, I think I'm just overly lucky. So Evan Ronan is a friend of mine. I've known him since like the first day of my freshman year of college. Um, and we eventually decided we're going to work together and started writing this book. It was lovely. It was easy. Like he and I just get along very, very nicely. I know some co-authors don't, and things get a little bit hairy. The logistics worked pretty straightforward. What we started was, how is this going to work between the two of us writing one novel? And the easiest solution seemed to be, well, why don't we have it from two points of view? And you write one, and I'll write the other. And that's largely what we did throughout. I mean, it began with a number of weekends where we would just get together. I'd go over to his house and we'd make a bunch of food, and we'd go into his dining room where he had a huge whiteboard, and we're scribbling on the board. What about this, and what about this turn, and what are we thinking about the third act? And so there was a lot of outlining ahead of time, which was really, really helpful, especially working with somebody else to I couldn't just go off on a tangent and be like, oh, this happened,
Right.
now fix it. So there was a lot of coordination at the beginning, and then the actual productivity was just okay. So I went home and I would write a chapter and I would send him the chapter, and then he would write his subsequent chapter and send it back to me, and we would just sort of ping pong back and forth like that. Um, but it worked really, really well. Though I do have to say I have heard horror stories about people working with other people, and the creative visions don't match up, and then the finances get involved, and
Yeah.
it can get really, really awkward. I'm just lucky that I have really good friends.
One thing that interests me about that is you're two writers. Obviously, you've known each other a long time, so you kind of understand each other's perspectives, and I assume are familiar with each other's style. But nonetheless, you
Mhm.
can't be writing, and you don't have the same styles. So when you're working on a project like this, are you trying to consciously create a style that both of you will write in for the whole book, or do you just not even worry about that and just figure that all gonna kind of wash out at the end since you're both editing and revising each other's work?
But it's interesting that you asked that because I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I think we did try to sort of normalize the tone, um, and the goals at the beginning. And I don't think we saw it quite as practically as you described it, though it ended up being that because when we started, like I said, we were just hanging out with a whiteboard and spitballing ideas and talking about books that we love and what we want to do, and what would this look like. So there was a lot of listing of, what if it's like this, and what if it's like this author, and have you read this book, read that one, and like maybe it's kind of like this. So I think sort of that the sense of tone and the goals for the book and maybe themes as well were laid a little bit unconsciously before we really got into it. So we knew like, oh, okay, here, 5 similar books that it's going to be like. We put together a log line of, here's what it's about, and it's kind of like this. And I mean, it's very much like putting together comp titles. This is what it looks like, so that we both sort of have an idea of where it's going. And then in the editing process, I think there was a lot of that where it's back and forth, and it just sort of, if he's doing this type of editing and I'm doing this type of editing, we're kind of back and forth a couple of times until it gets sanded down and smoothed over to some medium.
Yeah, I've collaborated with different writers and different things. I once worked as a member of a kind of a I don't know, a novel that was written by committee, I guess. We sort of had a writer's room, and that was really
Wow.
interesting. But I think,
Sure.
in a situation like that, you really do have to get as much of it down beforehand because, like you say, there's not that
Yeah.
much room for going off on your own creative tangent.
Yeah.
You're going to spoil everything for the other folks that you're working with.
Yeah.
All right, so here's another question. How would you approach getting over halfway through a piece or work and realizing your supporting character is actually the main character? Would you completely start from scratch, or would you kind of play Frankenstein with your work?
Ooh, I think that would be so dependent on the piece.
Mhm.
Um, though generally, right? Like, please don't take this as advice, because as you write your whole new novel over and you're like, damn you, Nate Green, you shouldn't
Right.
have done it. For me, it took a long time to realize that it's okay to throw words away. I've got lots. I keep making them. I'm putting them down every day. But for a very long time, I would write a story. I'm like, okay, well, I have this story, so what do I do with it? How do I fix it? Why isn't it selling? And it took me a long time to figure out, like, sometimes you get halfway through and you're like, oh, this is terrible. And I try to avoid that sunk cost fallacy of like, oh, I've already put all this time in it.
Yeah.
I should finish it. Um, Now anyway, I won't. Like, if I have a real sense that it is somehow fundamentally flawed or isn't going to work the way I have it at the moment, and I still like the project enough, I would start over.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that's what I would do.
Yeah. And I guess sometimes it helps to put something aside for a while to get
Yeah,
a little distance on it.
yeah.
Um, all right, let's move to another question here because we're coming to the end of our hour already. It's gone by
Mm.
in the blink of an eye. For first-time writers and authors, could you offer some advice in regard to the publishing process and what it's like? And this person is wondering, would it be better to find a publishing company to work with or to self-publish your work?
I I almost always recommend working with publishers for your at
Yeah,
least your first works. Um, so there's plenty of excellent self-published things that are rewarding. People who publish them are happy with them. Uh, for me, and anyway, my recommendation would be work, try to work with a publisher, right? If we're talking novels, right, looking for an agent, working with an
right.
agent, and then onto an editor, etc. And for the reason that I feel like I've always felt like I don't know what I don't know, right? And I think this is the standard writer imposter syndrome, perhaps. But having somebody else who has some vested interest in helping you make this book excellent,
Right.
will help you make it excellent. My experience with agents and editors has always been positive, and everybody has always just wanted to make this better. And I know I at least have a number of novels and many short stories that are just on a hard drive somewhere, and may they rest in peace, because that's I think where they should be. Right. And it's really hard, especially when you finish a novel or something and you say, oh, I finished it, I made this thing, it's good. And that's probably true. And working with somebody else is going to like help you make it even better.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't have any, our program offers instruction in self-publishing. I mean, we don't, officially privilege traditional publishing over self-publishing or vice versa. At the same time, I'm kind of, personally in your camp there. I feel like while self-publishing is extremely viable these days, I still feel like most writers are doing themselves a disservice by not trying to go the traditional route first.
Yeah.
And I know plenty of writers who have, finished their first novel, they self-publish it, and then they regret it because it's out there, and they get a little perspective, they get better at their craft, and they're like, oh, I never should have published that. I wish I hadn't.
Yeah. And one of the things that I find also is self-publishing, it's really hard, right? Like people talk about how hard it is to publish.
It's expensive.
Self-publishing,
it's
like
Yeah.
to publish is easy. I mean, you can just post, like just take your draft and put it on Amazon. You can, but like if you happen to be looking for, financial rewards, or right, you want to sell some books, you want to get people to read it, like it's difficult and it's expensive to have covers made, and right, like, and again, this is where my background and experience in advertising and marketing kind of comes in, and one of the reasons I left that, because I didn't like it. I didn't like advertising and marketing, but I see the work that goes into it, and that's all the work that a self-published author needs to do.
Yeah.
Instead of having a publisher to help you with it.
Yeah. So it's basically another full-time job.
Yeah.
So one thing that you mentioned a minute ago, I want to touch on, maybe the last thing that we can talk about tonight is, you mentioned like, writing works and they don't sell, and you wonder like, why aren't they selling? What do I need to do to fix this up? How important is it for writers to be trying to sell their work? I mean, even in the MFA, is it important to get that experience under your belt? And if so, why? Bit of a leading question.
I think it's important. It's been important to me to pursue publication. Occasionally I'll come across people in writing seminars and whatnot who might say like, well, I just write for me. This is like, I don't want to share it with other people. And I think that's entirely valid and valuable, right? Like if you're journaling or writing poetry or whatever it is that you want to do, and you just don't want to share it with other people, that's helpful for all sorts of reasons, including your mental health. But I think, and maybe this is a large assumption, but it seems like if you're in an MFA program and pursuing, the craft a little bit more deeply, the craft really like sort of inherently and by definition is concerned with audience, right? How do people in general like their stories told? Like what does it mean to be in the third act? Well, if you're just writing for you, it doesn't matter. But I think pursuing publication can be really, really valuable. I wouldn't recommend people pursue writing exclusively as for financial gains. But I think publishing, publishing has been really good for me to improve my craft, to make me a better writer. Right? Pursuing publication has made me write better. And like, sounds cheesy, but it's maybe make a lot of friends along the way too.
Yeah. And it's a good motivation.
Yeah.
Yep. that in spite.
Right. Well, it's sort of like, it's kind of like if you want to get in shape and you sign up for the 5K, that's 3 months from now. Like, okay, well, I have to sing, and it's gonna, help me achieve the goals that I say I want. I think it's similar to that, where like looking at publication, it's like, oh, and I don't know, it's rewarding in and of itself also. to just say like, oh, I made a thing that other people enjoy and appreciate. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So speaking of which, where are you with the novel that you're working on now? When do you anticipate that you'll have something for, to shop around to your age, for your agent to shop around, or
Yeah.
just where are you in that
So
whole process?
yeah, so I had written like I said, I'd written the whole novel by hand, and typed it up, and I am currently trying to get my second draft finished. I promised my writing group that it would be done by the end of June. Um, I padded it a little bit, so it might be before the
Yeah.
end of June, but don't
Okay,
tell them
great.
because they'll want it sooner. So anyway, but then like that, and that's my process anyway. Is I'm doing edits right now. I'm going through it. I'll send it to all of them, see what they think about it, and then it's on to shopping it around.
All right. Well, wish you the best of luck with that. It's a really cool
Thank you.
idea. And people say there's like no new ideas under the sun, but that's a new idea. Never heard of ventriloquism in witch trials
Yeah.
before, not in the same
Well,
book.
good.
So that's awesome. All right, so I want to thank Nathanael Green, my guest tonight. I want to thank everyone who took time out of their Monday to join us, and we'll see you next month. Till then, have a great month. Rest of the month, get some good writing done.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure.